So Tulsi Gabbard, welcome back to Primo Nutmeg.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being back on the show. So you are not going to be in the debates this week, and that's because the DNC had set these polling requirements that you have to poll above 2% in DNC-approved polls. And I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that system overall, on the polling, on the ones that are considered DNC qualified polls and not qualified polls. Just overall, your thoughts on the whole process.
I think overall what's become clear is there's been a lack of transparency in how the DNC has chosen which polls they will recognize, the polling practices of those pollsters, which ones are actually polling. There's a number of them that are not even running polls at all, and why they've excluded so many of the other credible polls that have been released. I think you're aware that we blew way past the DNC's donor requirement weeks ago of 130,000 individual contributors, and I think there are 26 polls that show that I have more than 2% support, which is the DNC's requirement. Some showing 3, 4, and 5, and others. So what we're calling for is more transparency from the DNC about these requirements and the polls they've chosen as qualifying, as opposed to the ones that they've said are not qualifying. I think voters deserve to know why they've made these decisions and how that best represents giving voters a choice in this Democratic primary.
Yeah, something that I thought was really interesting that came out a week or two ago is that CNN is actually providing funding for them to be doing the poll.
We just learned about that as well
in New Hampshire.
Well,
is there anything
and
that can
the
be
fact
done
that
about
they did not provide the funding when I think it was a UNH or another New Hampshire pollster said that CNN was supposed to provide them with the funding to do a poll, but they did not get that funding, so they didn't run the poll.
Right.
When you look at the majority of the polls that the DNC recognized leading up to between the second and third debate, they were national polls, which really show one thing. They're going to show whoever is the most well-known or whoever is the most famous or popular, as opposed to recognizing where we are in this campaign, a lot of focus on the early states, and that by choosing almost all national polls, you're not really showing a true representation of what's happening here on the ground and the growing support that we have.
So what can be done about that?
Well, I think we've got to continue to call for more transparency, call for the DNC to reassess the decisions that they've made so that we can really have a fair choice, voters can have a fair choice and trust that the system is serving them. And for us, meanwhile, we're continuing to push our campaign forward full bore. Grassroots, door knocks, town halls, phone calls, yard signs, social media campaigns, the whole works.
My own personal interpretation is that there's just so many roadblocks for you specifically. And just every time I see you on any kind of interview, they always hit you with the same attacks. They ask you about the same things. And just in the media overall, the different criticisms, ranging from Assad to calling you a quote-unquote Hindu nationalist, to saying that you're being supported by Russia, to saying that you're being supported by white nationalists. It's just absurd, and they're building this caricature about you that is supposed to embody all of these bad things and just have a visceral bad reaction. So I just want to ask you personally, how does that make you feel? I mean, does that hurt when you hear those things?
I don't pay much attention, to be honest, other than to recognize it for what it is, that they're trying to smear my character to undermine my campaign because I'm speaking the truth.
Right.
I'm speaking truth to power, bringing voice to the people, calling out corruption when and where I see it, and calling for real change. Recognizing that when we the people stand up and make sure that our voices are heard, it is only us who has the power to root out that corruption, to make sure that we have a government that's of, by, and for the people. So these attacks don't come as a surprise. It's important for us to call them for what they are, as absurd, baseless attacks, and continue to bring the focus back to service above self, serving the interests of the American people and making sure that our government is actually doing that.
So you are staying in this race
Yes.
Up until the primaries, correct?
Up until the convention, yes.
Awesome. So I know we don't have much time. I just wanted to ask you a couple of quick questions. One thing that Bernie Sanders has been talking about that's been getting a lot of popularity is debt forgiveness, specifically student loan forgiveness and medical debt forgiveness. Are these things that you might be considering, or are these issues that you think require a more nuanced approach?
I can't speak to the details of Bernie's plan, so I'm not going to comment on that. In the course of my campaign here in the near future, we'll be releasing my own plans on how we deal with this crippling student debt crisis that's facing a whole generation of people, as well as the high costs of healthcare and how that has negatively impacted a whole generation of people. I think it's important as we look at these two challenges in particular that you brought up, that we examine and understand the root cause of the problem. Because it's one thing to look at the debt that's been created, but just taking away the debt alone is not going to solve the problem of why that debt was created in the first place. Why is the cost of prescription medication skyrocketing? Why is the cost of healthcare skyrocketing? Why is it getting more and more expensive for people to go and get a higher education, get skills that they're looking for, they need to enter the job market? Why is it that we're not promoting more vocational training, apprenticeships, ways for people to get their education, get the skills that they need without having to fork out $50,000, $100,000, $200,000? There are a lot of opportunities here. We've got to get to the root cause of the problems so that we can make it so that the next generation does not have to deal with the same problems that we are.
Another candidate who's brought up something really interesting is Andrew Yang with Universal Basic Income. And just if you look at what's going to be happening in the coming years with so many blue collar and white collar jobs being automated, isn't this something that we really need to look into and start preparing for? What are we going to do when all of these jobs start being replaced by machines?
Yeah, I do. I think this is a serious thing that Washington so far is kind of turning a blind eye to. This automation revolution is quickly coming upon us, and it is going to have an impact on our jobs and frankly our way of life. I think it's important to look at the threats that exist there, but also really look at the opportunity. Not just assume that what automation brings is all bad, but also look and see, hey, how can we use automation to take away some of the really, really hard labor jobs perhaps, and then take those individuals who are working in that area and use their talents best elsewhere in a way that a robot can't replace them. I think that UBI is certainly worth considering. It's something that I'm looking further into to examine how it can help, not only with the automation revolution, but dealing with just the reality. Take that factor out. Many families in this country are one healthcare emergency away from total financial disaster. People living paycheck to paycheck, having no savings or safety net of their own. When they have an unexpected expense, they're broke, and it has such a negative impact on them and their families. So something like UBI could have a very positive role in providing that layer of financial security for folks. It's not going to cover everything, but I think it could go a long way, and I'm researching more different models. How would we pay for it? How much would it be? And so on and so forth.
I just recently interviewed economist Richard Wolff, and something that he brought to my attention was that Kristen Gillibrand was supporting a bill to invest in worker co-ops, and he's a real proponent of workplace democracy. I'm just wondering if that's something that you think is important as well.
I don't know much about it, to be honest. That's something I'd have to look into before forming my own opinion.
So one last question. I kind of broke some news on this show a few weeks ago when I had Mike Gravel on, and he was saying that he was endorsing both you and Bernie Sanders.
I still want to maintain my presence in the race by endorsing Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard. So I'll continue in that capacity. I believe that both campaigns will use me as a surrogate as time goes on here.
The media kind of got this wrong, and actually still today, if you go to many websites, they just say the Bernie Sanders half, and not that he was endorsing you. One thing I thought maybe might happen when you were in Indonesia is that he might be a surrogate for you and appearing at different events. I don't believe that that's happened yet. Will Mike Gravel be doing any kind of campaigning or surrogate events for you?
Well, I appreciate very much his support, and I've seen and heard of him speaking out for me and for my campaign on different platforms, and I look forward to him to being able, his voice continuing to be heard in this, because it's an important voice, and again, I'm honored to have earned his support.
Actually, just one last question. I also had Jill Stein on the show and some Green Party candidates that are running in the 2020 election, and she and someone else had mentioned that they might like you to run with the Green Party Is that something that you would ever consider, or are you dead set on supporting the Democratic nominee, whoever that might be?
Yeah, I'm not going to run as a third-party candidate or as an independent. The reality is that our country has a two-party system right now, and frankly, it's not viable to think that a third-party candidate in this day and age will be able to be successful in that election. My energy is, I've always been a Democrat, and my energy is focused on being the Democratic nominee, being in that position where I can be the president and leading our party towards bringing about the kinds of reforms that it needs, rooting out the corruption within our own party, and making it so that the Democratic Party truly represents the interests of the people and our planet.
Well, Tulsi Gabbard, thank you very much for being on Primo Nutmeg again. I really do appreciate
Thank
it. For
you.
folks
Good to
out
see
there
you.
who would like to get involved with your campaign and support you and make sure that they have a chance to cast a vote for you in their primary, how can they do that?
Go to tulsi2020.com to get more information about me, my campaign, my positions on issues, and follow me on social media. We're doing a lot on the road and posting a lot on social. You can engage with me directly there.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Cool. Thanks.